The bread was no larger than a fist. She had wrapped it in a square of linen, torn from the hem of her own nightgown, and pressed it flat beneath the folds of her coat. Outside, the air carried the sharp mineral scent of frozen ground and wood smoke. The column of prisoners would pass her fence in 7 minutes. She had counted the days. She knew the rhythm. If the guards saw her, they would shoot. She opened the door anyway. By the winter of 1944, Germany was a country running out of everything. Flour was rationed to grams. Coal was measured in handfuls. Every ounce of food that entered a household was accounted for, stamped, and tracked by local party officials. And yet, in villages along the railway lines from Brandenburg to Bavaria, in farm towns near the Stalags, and hamlets that sat on the forced march routes, something was happening that the Third Reich could not explain and could not stop. German women were feeding the enemy, not out of politics, not out of ideology, out of something far older than either. The punishment for what the state called Feindbegünstigung, aiding the enemy, was clear: imprisonment, in some cases execution. Gestapo informants lived on every block. Neighbors watched neighbors. A single loaf of bread, handed across a fence, could cost a woman her freedom or her life. And still, they did it. The accounts come not from German archives, most of those were destroyed, but from the men who survived, American, British, Canadian, and Australian prisoners who, decades later, still remembered the hands that reached through fences. Near Stalag VA in Moosburg, a British sergeant named James Stedman later wrote that a woman appeared at the wire every Tuesday and Thursday, just after the guard rotation changed. She never spoke. She carried a cloth bag. Inside, 4 potatoes, raw, sometimes still carrying traces of soil. She would set the bag against the lowest fence post and walk away without turning around. She did this for 5 months. In the Rhineland, during the winter marches of early 1945, POWs described village women who stood at the edges of roads, not watching, but waiting. When the guards looked away, even for seconds, bread, turnips, and once a jar of preserved plums were pushed into the hands of stumbling men. One American airman, Staff Sergeant David Westheimer, captured after his B-24 was shot down in Italy and marched across southern Germany, recalled a woman who ran alongside the column for nearly 50 meters, pressing a heel of dark bread into his hand. A guard shouted. She vanished into a doorway. Westheimer weighed 91 pounds at liberation. He kept the memory of that bread for the rest of his life. Not because it saved him, by then one piece could not save anyone, but because it told him something he had almost forgotten, that not everyone on the other side of the wire had agreed to be his enemy. The Reich did not overlook these women. In Saxony, a farmer's wife named Marguerite Hahn was reported by her own neighbor for leaving a bucket of water and 2 boiled eggs near a road used by marching prisoners. She was arrested within 48 hours. The Gestapo file classified her act as sabotage against the war effort. She spent the last 4 months of the war in a labor camp outside Dresden. She never spoke publicly about what happened to her there. Her daughter, interviewed in 1987, said only, "My mother walked differently after the war. She never walked quickly again." Others were luckier, if you can call it luck. Many were warned by sympathetic local officials. Some received visits from party members who told them carefully to stop. A few were beaten. Most were simply watched, trapped in a surveillance so tight that even kindness became an act of defiance. And yet, the bread kept appearing. In the final months, as the Eastern Front collapsed and the Reich ordered forced evacuations of POW camps, tens of thousands of prisoners were marched westward through German towns in columns that stretched for miles. The women of these towns had no strategic reason to help. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to close the shutters and wait. Instead, In town after town, women opened windows. They dropped bread wrapped in cloth. They left pitchers of water at doorsteps they knew the columns would pass. In some villages, they stood in groups, not protesting, not speaking, just holding out whatever food they had. The guards, by then, were too exhausted to punish all of them. There is no monument to these women, no plaque, no museum wing. Most of their names were never recorded. The men they fed often did not know who they were, and the women themselves, raised in a culture that demanded silence, rarely spoke of what they had done. But perhaps that's the point. The bread was never meant to be remembered. It was meant to be eaten, quickly, desperately, in the space between one guard's glance and the next. It carried no message, no ideology, no flag. It carried only this: you are starving. I have bread. The rest does not matter. Let the bread, then, stand as the quiet answer to a question the war kept asking: whether anything human could survive a machine built to destroy humanity. The women of those villages answered with their hands, not with words, not with weapons, with 4 potatoes in a cloth bag set against a fence on a frozen Tuesday morning. And then they walked away, without turning around.